Story 1. It is 90% owned by the biggest money-grubbing idiots you will ever meet. If you think by buying cannabis you are supporting anyone who deserves it, think again. I have more than 10 years in the industry and have met a lot of chief executive officers and company owners. They are absolutely out of touch, unethical, and greedy. Note this received a lot of attention. Cannabis workers, treat your fellow employees well and with respect. We have to be better than our owners. If you see power games happening, call them out. These power-hungry chief executive officers are not as smart as they try to appear. Story 2. It is not as expensive or difficult as you might think if you remember growing bean plants in elementary school. Some retired police officers own many of the largest brands, and many of these companies would oppose changes to the law that would allow everyday citizens to grow their own. Story 3. Margins are decreasing every day. It is a race to the bottom, and the cracks are already showing. Story 4. Sometimes we get bags of unlabeled stuff and just slap a label on them. Story 5. There are more pesticides than you might think, so make sure you buy good quality products. Story 6. Strain names are changed at will for marketing and sales needs, including indica, hybrid, and sativa. If a company was low on sativas, it labeled some hybrids as sativa-leaning hybrids and vice versa. It is important to know where your cannabis is grown, who grows it, and how it is grown. The same applies to the food you eat. Strain names have become akin to people naming their children after inanimate objects. Tetrahydrocannabinol content does not have much bearing on how high you get. Industry standards have pushed producers to sell products with 25% or higher tetrahydrocannabinol content. Testing practices are not where they need to be, so companies can choose the biggest, best buds from a batch to test higher. That does not reflect the average for the entire batch. A lot of flower from larger brands is not grown and cured properly. They push for the biggest and fastest yields, which shortens growing and curing time. Time is money. Fillers are used in many vape products. A product may be marketed as rosin or live resin-based but use distillate as a filler to cut costs. It is similar to how fast food restaurants claim 100% beef, when, in reality, the beef portion may be much smaller, even though that smaller portion is technically beef. Story 7. There is a fascinating Freakonomics podcast about the marijuana industry. It is worth a listen. Bottom line, it is expensive and difficult to enter. Regulations and drug classification issues present huge hurdles. Many operators make shockingly little money considering the large capital outlay required to get started. Story 8. I have had a lifelong career in cannabis, and here are a few of my thoughts. I would argue most of the metrics people use when buying cannabis are nonsense. Tetrahydrocannabinol to price ratios, chasing the highest number, all that spreadsheet shopping do not reflect how cannabis actually works. Your nose will tell you far more than a lab label ever will. I have had plenty of fruity or purple strains with low tetrahydrocannabinol that got me much more intoxicated than some 40% genetically modified organism strain. Terpenes and overall chemistry matter. The test number is not the experience. Personally, I fill vaping pens with pure high-terpene extract, which generally tests at 40 to 60% tetrahydrocannabinol and has higher terpene levels. I find it produces a significantly stronger effect than products testing at 85% or more tetrahydrocannabinol because it contains supporting minor cannabinoids and terpenes. Buy one, get one deals are not always your friend. Often you become the garbage disposal for inventory that did not sell. That is not universally true. Some legitimate brands will offer a genuine deal. Check package dates and know what you are actually getting. Indoor flower is typically what people smoke. Outdoor, greenhouse, sun-grown, and mixed-light flower often shines when it is extracted. The burn on many sun-grown or light-assisted flowers can be harsh, but their terpene profiles are stronger and more complex. That makes them ideal for vaping cartridges, edibles, and concentrates. Not everything needs to be top-shelf flower. Some cultivars are simply suited for processing, and when they are, the extract usually hits harder and tastes better than the flower ever could. Story 9. Laws allow and the market encourages farms to relabel strains arbitrarily, which damages the credibility of medicinal use. Story 10. I spent 3 years in the industry, and many managers had large egos and substance abuse issues, which made for a very difficult work environment. Story 11. This might not be surprising, but seeing how much weed was in cold storage the first time blew my mind. It looked like a large commercial freezer with huge garbage bags piled to the ceiling. I don't know why, but it took me a while to see that as normal. Story 12. An acquaintance of mine was a licensed medical cannabis grower in California. Before recreational legalization, he would make about $3,200 per pound. After legalization, fees and regulatory costs increased so much that he ended up making about $200 net from the same pound. He closed the business. Story 13. I am an engineer. I helped refine an oven extraction method as a favor for a client and quickly realized this industry is rife with scams and poor practices. Because it is not legal at the federal level and state laws are uncoordinated, cannabis products are highly risky to consume. Setting aside politics, look at the startups. Many cannabis operations are ignorant of food and consumer safety. Analytical testing is often more of a marketing scheme than a quality assurance protocol. Lead and other heavy metal exposure is rampant because inexperienced operators continue to use improper setups. This is just what I learned working adjacent to the extracts market. As for chemistry and chemical engineering, good luck. Most of these startups are founded by people who have no business producing consumer products. People who used my client's product had no idea how little quality assurance went into its extraction. Those gummy worms are not safe for consumption. Those tinctures tested positive for heavy metals. That vacuum-sealed bag of Northern Lights spent time in a mold-infested warehouse. Story 14. Some of the handling of medical cannabis in my state would shock consumers. I live in Pennsylvania and was a commercial cannabis grower for a year, and I have many friends still in the industry. Bud rot in large grow rooms is considered acceptable, and it is rare to take down a room without finding significant amounts. Instead of pulling the flower from sale and discarding it or separating it for extraction, we would sort out the visibly damaged colas and throw them away during harvest. The issue is that mold spores can remain on the finished flower. Testing for tetrahydrocannabinol and terpenes is typically done on a single sample of freshly harvested, unprocessed flower. Machine trimming and other post-harvest handling can damage the finished product, and we did not perform post-processing testing. Therefore, the samples tested may not reflect the product sold in a dispensary several months after harvest. The grow where I worked only sprayed sulfur and ascorbic acid. I have a friend who grows for a multi-state operator who also sprays horticultural oil and other pesticides on the flower. We also flushed very large amounts of salt-based nutrients down the drain, which is wasteful and environmentally unsustainable. I think indoor growing is harmful to the environment. With looser regulations, people will be shocked by the energy and fertilizer wasted growing indoors. Story 15. There is nothing glamorous about being a grower, and we do not get paid very well. It is just repetitive indoor farming. The skills and knowledge do lend themselves to other aspects of horticulture, which is a plus. Unless you are growing for yourself, I do not recommend it as a career. Also, you will smell like weed all the time. Story 16. I do not think most people would be surprised by much. There are not many secrets or processes that would be shocking. The plants are grown, harvested, and dried. Some are made into concentrates, while others are sold as flour. They might be surprised by how ordinary the facilities are. Our grow and extraction labs did not look like a dealer's living room with black lights and tacky posters. It was an agricultural facility that was bright, clean, and well kept. I think people would be surprised by how strict the regulation is in my state, though that will vary between jurisdictions, and by how much cash is kept in the store at any given time. I had never seen $1 million in cash in one place until I worked in the industry. Story 17. Most premium joints are actually house-made rolls with extras. If you plan to buy pre-rolls, choose a reputable licensed brand. Story 18. For me, it is tetrahydrocannabinol that people treat as the end-all and be-all. People love these vapes that reach 90% or higher and taste like anything you can imagine. These are just distillates in which the tetrahydrocannabinol molecule is isolated and placed in a carrier oil. The high from these vape pens and cartridges is the same, short-lived, relaxing, and often produces a heavy-headed feeling. Live resin or rosin typically has a lower concentration of tetrahydrocannabinol but yields strain-specific effects and provides a longer-lasting high. Story 19. I did security for a farm for 2 years. They could not get rid of mold in the hydration lines, similar to the bacterial problems restaurants have with soda lines. They dip the harvested produce in a hydrogen peroxide solution to slow the growth. Story 20. I did not work for a dispensary or sell cannabis directly. I worked for a large distributor of vaporizers for cannabis, more specifically vaporizers for dry herb rather than oil cartridges. The common assumption is that cannabis users are young people chasing a high, but at least 60% of our customers were older than 70. They mainly used it to treat conditions such as Parkinson's disease, loss of appetite from chemotherapy, and glaucoma. If a vaporizer failed or was not delivered on time, we were depriving people of real pain relief. It felt essential to get them the relief they needed. It was not just people using cannabis to get high for fun. Story 21. Here are a few things I learned from about 5 years working in cultivation. Pre-rolls are often made from the weakest, poorest-looking, and fungus-infected buds so consumers cannot tell. There are many inexperienced people running the industry. Very little botany knowledge is present at the top of most companies. Instead, there is a lot of business politics. Many decisions make little sense for plant cultivation and the final product, and there are often unrealistic expectations. Companies may present themselves as part of cannabis culture for marketing and appearances. Support small growers and independent producers. Unless you are a grower, sativa and indica are primarily marketing labels and do not reliably predict consumer effects. They refer more to plant growth characteristics. Consumers should consider cannabinoid and terpene profiles rather than focusing only on a high tetrahydrocannabinol percentage to find the effects they want. This is a complex topic, so this is a generalization. There is such a thing as cannabis and terpene allergies. Many people who work with live plants experience allergic reactions, including breathing problems, rashes, and sneezing. Day-to-day exposure can be difficult. Know that many growers are dedicated to their work and committed to producing quality product. Story 22. I work as a data analyst in the cannabis industry and write about trends throughout the sector. Many people complain that cannabis is stronger than ever, making it unapproachable for them. The reality is that frequent users are primarily concerned with price and potency. They consume large quantities, so they prioritize low cost and high potency. That raises tolerance and leads them to seek products with high tetrahydrocannabinol content. This is why some strains measure 30% tetrahydrocannabinol, which many people find too strong. The industry would like to develop diverse, artisanal products, but when its largest source of revenue demands cheap, high-potency ounces, producers are forced to cater to a small segment of consumers. If you enjoy cannabis but do not prefer high-potency products, consider products that emphasize minor cannabinoids. Tetrahydrocannabinol is only one of many cannabinoids produced by the plant. Others include cannabidiol, cannabigerol, cannabinol, tetrahydrocannabidiol, and cannabichromine. Products that include a range of cannabinoids aim to provide a more targeted experience rather than an overwhelming high. Story 23. A close friend of mine owns and manages a farm. Growing the crop is not particularly difficult or expensive, although he is forced to grow indoors, which is harder. Keeping up with all the regulations is unbelievably costly. He had a small procedural error when he got started. I will not get into the details. It was entirely a paperwork issue and had nothing to do with the equipment or the finances. As a result of the mix-up, he was not legally allowed to sell his first crop and had to destroy the entire harvest. We were not able to help him destroy it. The law does not allow a series of small fires as an appropriate disposal method. Story 24. One thing that surprises many people is how strict the regulations are. Every plant is tracked like a very important person with a wristband. From seed to sale, staff scan everything. There are barcodes, logs, cameras, and staff double-check paperwork. The bud undergoes more tests than some college students. They check for pesticides, mold, potency, and heavy metals. It is essentially a health exam. That is why sometimes a strain tastes amazing one month and disappears the next. Probably failed a test and was rejected. Sad but true. Story 25. The people who own the store probably have zero actual business experience and are winging it. Story 26. People who install lighting and ventilation systems make a lot of money. Story 27. At least half of us do not consume. This includes corporate leaders and the people behind the counter. Story 28. No one seems willing to pay others. Dispensaries often refuse to pay distributors or suppliers. It is wild how companies in this industry take advantage of one another. There is a lot of bad blood between many producers, distributors, and retailers. There is no reliable distinction between sativa and indica. Traditional sativa and indica labels do not map cleanly to genetics. Modern cannabis strains are heavily hybridized, and laboratory testing shows poor correlation between those names and actual chemical profiles. In that sense, the labels are mostly meaningless marketing exaggerations. Many effects that people attribute to sativa or indica correspond more closely to terpene dominance than to the plant's lineage. Story 29. My wife grew a single plant in the backyard. It was huge. She is probably still using flowers from the same plant a year later. San Diego, California. Story 30. If you smoke flower and it causes an itchy feeling in the back of your throat or a persistent cough, the bud almost certainly has powdery mildew. Often you can see it if you crack a nug and look at the stem. You will see a powdery white substance, not trichomes, on the inner stem of the buds. This is the best way to check because even if the grower sprays it off the flowers before harvest, they can almost never get penetration deep enough to remove it from the stems inside the buds, even with fine misters. Another surefire way to tell is to turn on your phone flashlight, turn off other lights, and crack a nug directly over the light. If you see a cloudy dust come out of the nug, that is either powdery mildew or other molds such as botrytis, also called bud rot. Many growers sell moldy flower, including some medical dispensaries, assuming most customers cannot tell. Story 31. Mold, powder mold, stem rot, cotton mold, and many others. We call it the third partner. Story 32. I have been a bud tender, a production worker making pre-rolls, and currently work in inventory and distribution. I have worked in both the recreational and medical markets in Colorado and New York, with about 4 years of experience. Because of all the steps between growing and sales, even the freshest flower on a store shelf could have been harvested weeks earlier. Unless the grow operation is connected to the store, there is not much they can do about it. That is just how the supply chain works. Story 33. This is somewhat specific, but if you are considering a retail job in the cannabis industry in Ontario, Canada, you should reconsider. Working as a bud tender used to be enjoyable, but now there is little passion in the industry, and the market bubble burst long ago. Customers seek the highest amount of tetrahydrocannabinol for the lowest possible cost, which has taken much of the enjoyment out of helping people. Many stores are closing because they cannot compete or are not making enough money to stay afloat amid market changes. Job security has been a concern throughout the more than 3 years I have worked in the industry. Story 34. I am curious how the financial side works. I know there is an issue with bank accounts because of federal law. Also, there seem to be so many purveyors. Is it a good investment? Story 35. Know your grower or grow your own. Don't trust what you see in the store to be high quality or safe just because it's on the shelf. Story 36. The tetrahydrocannabinol concentration is virtually meaningless as an indicator of how high something will make you. Story 37. Indica and sativa are somewhat outdated. If you ask for a pure indica, you often get a hybrid that is marketed as having indica-like properties. We need to focus more on terpenes, but better legalization and more testing are needed before this becomes widespread. Story 38. I have been in and out of the industry for 3 years. If you want to work in the industry, I suggest doing it as a part-time job to keep it light and fun. Making it your whole life, moving up the ladder, and getting deeper into the industry will drain you. 99% of companies are similar. Because in some states it is still considered a startup, there is no internal regulation. There are many compliance issues from growers to distributors to retailers. It is fun occasionally, but in my opinion, it is not a sustainable industry to work in. Story 39. Distillates are procured from low-quality cannabis, refined in machines similar to those used in the petroleum industry, and bottle-derived terpenes are added for flavor. The cannabis industry is a front for money laundering. Pre-rolls are filled. Preformed cones are usually made by hand in China. Brands market to those with money. They do not have values. Big surprise. China manufactures most electronic vape devices, selling empty cartridges for about $1. The distillate costs about 10 cents. Longtime growers who grew high-quality cannabis outdoors are out of luck. Nobody cares about 10 ounces of packaging waste per single-dose product. Recycling is not a priority. Story 40. 6 small plants outside, with very little work, can keep you and your friends stoned all year. I used to grow about 15-foot plants for commercial reasons. It's a lot of work to take care of plants that big. Now that I'm retired, I grow 6 plants of 3 different strains. I do light pruning during the vegetative stage and only feed a few times during the flowering season. My growing medium is a good potting soil and half a bag each of chicken manure and cow manure. I water with drippers twice a day, about a gallon each time. Plant on June 1st for giant plants. Plant on July 1st for medium plants. Plants are usually harvested around October 15th. Story 41. It is all marketing. Most of the claims are nonsense used to inflate the price. Story 42. Extensive sterilization occurs before testing. Companies remediate products using irradiation machines that kill organisms, which can allow products to pass testing when they otherwise would not. Story 43. It is incredibly cheap when they buy the product for the store, and big cities are overcharging you. An eighth is nowhere near $50 when the store purchases it. Story 44. We are opposed not only by the alcohol and tobacco industries but also by the medical marijuana lobby. They have lost significant revenue because of the recreational and hemp markets. The hemp market, in particular, is opposed by many, including large pharmaceutical companies, because it offers alternatives to painkillers that can damage the body. Politicians profit by restricting access to cheaper medications out of greed. It was much easier and more profitable when marijuana was illegal. As the population aged, legalization made more sense. Now the government heavily taxes small businesses while large corporations buy out competitors, pushing most out of the industry. The black market will not disappear unless marijuana is rescheduled. Story 45. Many of the cannabis products are moldy, and senior management does not understand cannabis at all. I am referring to a specific business. Story 46. I work for a company that uses only union labor from cultivation to the dispensary. We are represented by Union Local 338 in New York. There are several brands that we supply, and I can compile a list for anyone who would like to support union-grown cannabis. Story 47. You are being sold placebo and misinformation. Most cannabis flower is hybrid. There is no evidence that indica and sativa classifications matter in edible forms, and most edibles are made using a mixture of cannabis plants, making those classifications even less meaningful. Many products are renamed. A product labeled Northern Lights distillate cartridge is not necessarily made from the Northern Lights strain, and the same applies to many concentrates. Reported tetrahydrocannabinol numbers are often inflated. Update. I see legitimate comments receiving downvotes. Large corporate cannabis has arrived. Story 48. The product that was tested and the product you were sold came from different plants in the batch. There is no way to know whether one had mildew or whether this bud had the same trichome levels as the buds referenced on the label. Story 49. I worked in the legal market for 3 years and many more years in the gray and black markets. If your flower fails testing for mold, you can retest it without altering it and sell it if it passes on the second round. Most shops will not undertake remediation unless required. Third-party remediation becomes expensive quickly if your cultivation environment is not dialed in. If you know you have a moldy batch and you are on good terms with the third-party laboratory technician, they may be selective about which buds they test to improve your chances of passing. This does happen, although it is not common. Pay attention to growers' online reputations for better peace of mind. Story 50. Some licensed producers in Canada use specific insects as a form of pest control. Those insects can end up in milled products, including oils, edibles, and other items. Story 51. The average consumer should ask about terpenes instead of just looking at tetrahydrocannabinol. Story 52. There is so much great cannabis that goes unsmoked because it is not 28% or greater. The tetrahydrocannabinol content has very little to do with how it affects you. Story 53. Vape cartridges are the biggest scam in the industry. They are mostly filled with distillate and food-grade terpenes that are not derived from cannabis. The labels indica and sativa are pure marketing and do not produce distinct effects. Any perceived differences are the power of suggestion. Most products labeled live resin are just distillate with a small amount of actual live resin, if you are lucky. Even when terpenes are cannabis-derived, processing often strips them of any characteristics associated with indica or sativa. You are left with a brief high from tetrahydrocannabinolic acid and none of the other qualities that make cannabis enjoyable, in my opinion. The margins are insane. It costs literally pennies to produce a single cartridge, and then you are charged premium prices because they slap a live resin sticker on the packaging. Story 54. I worked for a company for a while that was looking for a legal way to sell shares to current customers. The investors were unhappy with the rate of return and saw the company losing market share and money, so they wanted to sell their shares to uninformed customers and exit. The cannabis business was not the money machine they had hoped for. With rising costs, increased competition, and growth in delivery services where the company once had a significant share, it was not the windfall they expected. Story 55. I left the industry a few years ago, so this may not be relevant anymore, but testing was a complete joke. They did not randomly sample cannabis flower from the cultivation. Instead, they let you choose what to submit for compliance testing. If most of your crop had mold or pests, you could just find a clean sample and submit that. Before legalization, when it was still medical, I saw some horrible products being sold in dispensaries. Story 56. A single vape cartridge can be made from over 400 different sources or strains of cannabis. Story 57. When you go into a dispensary and see a label that reads 30% tetrahydrocannabinol, know that you are not getting 30% tetrahydrocannabinol in the product is sold. Different parts of the plant produce buds with different potencies. The top cola is the most potent. To obtain a potency measurement, a sample must be sent to a laboratory if the grower does not have on-site testing equipment. The laboratory will test the best-looking bud, and that sample may return a result of 30% tetrahydrocannabinol. However, the whole harvest is typically put through a mechanical trimmer, which breaks off a majority of the trichomes from the buds, reducing overall potency. The broken trichomes are often collected and pressed into hash or sold as keef. Story 58. I am a brewery owner in one of the most permissive recreational states where $40 an ounce is common. Getting into the industry is basically impossible unless you are a farmer or a chef. People want consistency and edibles that match the quality of beverages, baked goods, and niche products. It is an entirely separate industry with a mountain of hurdles, so we said screw it and we grow our own hops. Consistent beer is much easier. Story 59. No one in the industry is making money, and all multi-state operators carry hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. Story 60. If people saw how moldy those plants can become before harvesting, they would be much less inclined to buy from your average dispensary. Story 61. There are just over 100 cannabinoids in a cannabis plant. Story 62. This whole video. Basically, she is a strong pro-legalization cannabis researcher who has conducted extremely in-depth research on the current cannabis situation in the United States. Story 63. Many of the first batch of licenses issued in my state went to a family that owns a major brewery. They effectively have a legal monopoly on vice in my area, but because ownership is through limited liability companies with random-sounding names, most people do not realize it. The rich get richer. Story 64. Working in the industry has little to do with cannabis in the sense that you never actually see the product. It arrives in pre-portioned sealed jars or bags. You cannot smell it, see it, or test it. If you want to work in the industry because it is related to your hobby, you will likely be disappointed unless you work in cultivation. Story 65. We try to mitigate it as much as we can, but a substantial amount of product is discarded in the process. Story 66. I didn't believe in toxic work environments until I spent 8 years working in cultivation facilities and dispensaries. Story 67. The objective has become to grow large enough to attract a buyout from a deep-pocketed corporate competitor, or to compromise ethics to obtain profit. Story 68. I am not an industry worker, but even many industry workers do not understand the percent tetrahydrocannabinol figure. It is not how much tetrahydrocannabinol the cannabis contains. It is the percent of the cannabinoid content that is tetrahydrocannabinol. It is essentially meaningless and very inaccurate. It is not a good way to judge potency or quality. Story 69. The industry does not care at all about conserving water, responsible water use, or watershed health. 1/8 of an ounce of cannabis in that recyclable foil space pack with the cool graphics was previously wrapped in an ounce's worth of various turkey bags and heavy-duty vacuum-sealed plastic bags, all of which are now sitting in a landfill. Yet they celebrate the recyclable foil bag for Mother Gaia. Story 70. The owner of my company ultimately transitioned our warehouse into a cultivation facility. I was forced to work on both sides of the fence, managing my employees for the original business while also handling all of the operations that were slowly pushing us out. After about 2 years of construction on the cultivation facility and constant, "Are we going to get shut down?" conversations, our once thriving team of 15 employees was whittled down to 5, and we were all eventually let go. My severance was $3,000, which covered 2 months of rent. I went from making $3,600 per month to still being unemployed 9 months later. We worked in a niche area of computer hardware retail, and our location is in a very poor town with an extremely unstable job market. I saw it coming but did not prepare myself, and when the cards fell, I was left fucked. I hope his new venture fails miserably and he incurs a huge loss. Story 71. I worked trimming at half a dozen grow operations. It was like any production environment, where they expected you to trim a certain number of ounces a day. Some operations even paid bonuses for extra production. At one facility, I trimmed plants that were destined for live resin. We had 15 minutes from when a plant was harvested until it had to be in the freezer. One operation required us to walk through a sanitizing arch while standing in a sanitizing solution, then don white suits. I was impressed by their diligence. Others required only that we wash up. Story 72. Mold and mildew are constantly present in every warehouse. Story 73. Never buy a pre-roll. I milled everything you could imagine. Story 74. I have worked in the industry for 19 years. I do research and development for extraction systems and assist with assembly, installation, and training. I travel extensively across North America and occasionally internationally. I recently spoke at hemp conferences in Tokyo and Bangkok. 1. Much cannabis marketing is based on unproven ideas used to convince people to buy one product over another. Example: there is no such thing as a full-spectrum extract. It violates the concept of an extract to claim it represents the entirety of the source material. When someone uses that term, it indicates they do not understand extraction or they are being willfully deceptive. 2. Many things are labeled education when they are thinly veiled marketing. Example: people discuss terpenes as if they are more responsible for effects than cannabinoids and often reference the entourage effect. If you ask whether the concentration of any terpene matters, whether one terpene may negatively impact the effect, or whether it is hard to predict effects with random concentrations of multiple terpenes, they often cannot answer or become upset. 3. The industry is moving toward large-scale mass production. The desire for craft or preservation of a bygone culture is weaker than demand for low-cost products that meet average needs. Over time, expect to see fewer indoor grows and more large outdoor grows. As legalization spreads, countries with lower production costs will dominate. Story 75. Medical marijuana does not mean much. At most, it is held to slightly higher standards regarding mold and similar contaminants, but otherwise it is the same strains that recreational consumers buy. Tetrahydrocannabinol is not the be-all and end-all of how a strain will affect you. The entourage effect plays a major role. You should not tip us unless we actually did something helpful for you. Story 76. Choose cannabis based on appearance rather than reported percentages. Percentages can be manipulated, and many companies will cultivate a single plant exceptionally well and use it for testing. That is why you sometimes see cannabis that tests high but looks like low-quality product. The rest of the crop is usually low quality. Story 77. Is there a rolling machine you would recommend? I hate rolling. I have bought many devices. Small rolling machines, grinders, and papers with filters. Nothing smokes as well as a pre-roll, even though I know I am being overcharged. Any tips? Story 78. I am in Massachusetts and have 5 years of experience in retail, wholesale, laboratory testing, and other roles. Flower buds that fail certain quality assurance tests, such as tests for mold or microbiology, are often distilled into oil and used in vapes and edibles. I would argue that most vapes that claim to be a specific strain are actually a mixture of different strains based on whatever was available. I have seen chain of custody documents listing the source batches. Story 79. The distillate cartridges are made from floor and bucket weed. Live resin and rosin are the high-quality products that are frozen immediately after harvest for processing. Safety regulations were a joke. The safety officer at the farm where I worked slowed progress in some rooms by not allowing workers back in for a set amount of time after pesticides and other chemicals had been sprayed. Metal racks at head height were everywhere without padding, which caused many people to cut their heads and ears. People who were too large to work on ladders were forced to use them or they lost their jobs. When I first started, I told my supervisor that a fire extinguisher in one room had expired a couple of months earlier. 3 months later, when I left, it still had not been replaced. It is run by money-grubbing chief executive officers and habitual cannabis users, so it was as chaotic as you might expect. At least they recently unionized. Story 80. It sucks. It's like working at a dollar store. You get about as much respect from management, and they often have even more unnecessary rules. Story 81. I worked on the construction of 2 grow operations in Canada. You would be surprised how scientific it is. Each room was one step away from a clean room, with freezer panel walls and ceilings, and subdivided into smaller batch-sized rooms. I spoke with several engineers who said the focus was on producing a consistent tetrahydrocannabinol concentration that could be packaged and sold and on preventing strains from getting mixed up. If plants were simply sown in a field, there would be no food-grade consistency. Their goal, possibly influenced by government regulation, was consistent potency, similar to how alcoholic beverages are standardized, for example 5% alcohol in beer and 40% alcohol in whiskey. Story 82. It's a cash-only business. Traveling to government offices to pay taxes is dangerous. Banks do not want to work with the industry. Story 83. Although some companies make strain-specific edibles, sativa, hybrid, and indica effects are derived from terpenes. They are made from the same batch of distillate. This is how wild gummies are made. Edit. Not the craziest secret. Story 84. I would never smoke outdoor cannabis. The biodiversity in a cannabis field is significant, which means those organisms will be in your crop. Spiders, frogs, rabbits, mice. I have even seen bears in a field. The cleanliness is questionable. In my opinion, outdoor crops should be used for extracts, not flower or pre-rolls. Biosecurity issues with growers are significant. Growers have been responsible for spreading problems that consumers are not aware of. All grows have some issues, from basic pest pressure such as two-spotted mites, thrips, mildew, or other fungal problems due to the environment. In agriculture, there is always some crop loss, and most licensed growers will not admit that. There are more serious problems like russet or broad mites, cannabis aphids and root aphids, and viruses and diseases such as hops latent viroid that are being identified and passed along with clones. There is an acceptable, more organic approach that works, but it is usually much more expensive than using banned pesticides. 9 times out of 10, the license holder will choose the chemical option, and often they do not apply it correctly. In summary, usually the smaller the grow, the better the quality. The person growing at home will often have better product than a large commercial grow, but that is a different conversation. Story 85. Not sure how true it is, but I have seen pictures of entire crops being taken over by spider mites. The worker who took the picture said they would still use the plants and turn them into extracts. Story 86. Most large growers run their flower through an irradiation machine to kill microbial contaminants. Some concentrates are made from waste material that failed testing or from bags of contaminated flour. Story 87. It is legal to grow cannabis in my state, so you can now obtain it for free. Story 88. Product quality from harvest to shelf declines significantly due to constant or incorrect handling. Story 89. We still prefer to shop on the black market because the products are better. Story 90. The whole business is extremely fragile. You are one Epstein release away from a needed cover-up story, and cannabis and tetrahydrocannabinol are easy ones. Story 91. I was more of a third-party employee years ago, but almost every major growing facility with large rooms and many plants is an experiment. The head growers can try their best to control the factors and have an idea, but you would be surprised how wrong it can go and how much flour has to be thrown out. 5 plants does not translate to 500. There is no equation. Story 92. Bud is shaken or tumbled, so it can be used in concentrates before it is bagged and sold at the store. Story 93. Vapes and edibles are made with oils that were probably rejected for other uses. Story 94. Not an industry worker, but a former grower. Bake and eat it, do not smoke it. All the high, none of the respiratory disease. Story 95. Large companies offer subscriptions, overcharge on some items, and drastically reduce prices on other major items that smaller companies cannot match, driving them out of business. For example, I work at a small local shop with 4 workers. We charge $29 for a 1-gram low-quality cartridge. But our 1-ounce products, which are worth buying in my opinion, are $100. A large company can charge the 1-gram cartridge at $30 or $31, but they sell the 1 ounce for $80. As a consumer, I would rather pay $80 for the ounce. The difference in the cartridge price does not matter when I see better prices on bulk products. The shop I work at would go under in a month if we matched those prices. Story 96. Curaleaf is one of the largest cannabis producers in the United States. Most of our customers are older people looking for something to help them sleep or to manage pain. There are fewer recreational users than most people assume, but some are still present. Story 97. Distillate cartridges labeled with recognizable strain names like sour diesel are not actually derived from a sour diesel plant. The cultivator adds terpenes to the distillate to make it taste similar to the plant and then labels it accordingly. If it is not live resin or live rosin, it is not worth buying. Story 98. Do you mean Glass House Farms is hiring undocumented children under 14? I do not believe that these brands in California are following the law regarding pesticide use. If brands hire the cheapest labor, they are likely getting away with more. Story 99. Each state in the United States has drastically different laws regarding cannabis. Even if both states allow legal cannabis, they will not have the same protocols and testing requirements. For example, some states are less concerned about mold in cannabis than others. I work for a multi-state operator. It is a very large company. If I told you the name and you consume cannabis, you would know it. Many of your favorite brands are one bad quarter away from having to liquidate assets. I am very concerned for the future of cannabis if we do not federally regulate it, but I would not want to see regulation under this administration. Also, I am not sure for all states, but in my area the local city council decides whether you can have consumption events. There is a lot of talk about the state and who allows what, but as an event organizer I can tell you it is not the state, it is your city. You need to get out and vote in your local elections and stop blaming a large conglomerate for preventing a consumption lounge in your area. You can see which city council members voted against it and then not vote for those people. I have helped small towns in the rural Midwest host events due to a years-long local voting push. Story 100. Growing cannabis. Forget what the green influencers say about how to grow. Throw that nonsense out. Growing is simple. You can do it almost automatically. Seriously. You will hear about compost teas, a waste of time. Bokashi, a boutique option that costs more but offers little benefit. Super complex soil mixes, interesting to learn, but you will often get better results by mixing your own. Hormone products, unnecessary. And practices like only composting and extracting plant remains to tailor the output. That approach is misguided and has no scientific basis. Seasoned growers call it stoner science. Take a gardening class at your local Master Gardener program, and you will be far ahead of many of these people. Story 101. Tetrahydrocannabinol numbers are often fabricated, and even if they were accurate, you cannot tell in a blind test which product has more tetrahydrocannabinol. My favorite strain I ever smoked was 14% tetrahydrocannabinol, and everyone I got to try it thought it was unreal. Buying by percentage is a good way to buy something you do not like. Terpenes are more important than tetrahydrocannabinol for defining your experience. Strain names are made up for marketing. Some companies use the actual strain name, but most will label the same batch of cannabis with 4 different names for 4 different brands. A company might rename a strain for a specific phenotype. Sometimes they rename a run that did not turn out as well. If a company packages cannabis for stores to sell under their own brand, that same cannabis may appear in many other brands packaged in the same facility. Story 102. Most places do not regulate mold or yeast. Many companies use radiation to manipulate testing results. There is significant corruption in testing laboratories. Story 103. Indica and sativa do not function as advertised. The terms cannabis indica and cannabis sativa have been distorted by the American cannabis industry to give consumers a simple explanation for different experiences. Generally, indica is described as sleep-inducing, calming, and pain-relieving, a so-called body high. Sativa is described as creative, invigorating, and euphoric, a so-called head high. This is a huge oversimplification. In the United States, most plants are genetic mixes that are neither pure indica nor pure sativa. Botanists originally used the terms to describe plant morphology. Cannabis indica grew in hot, arid climates and produced short stalks and small, tightly compact buds. Cannabis sativa grew mainly in tropical climates, competing with other plants for sunlight and resources, so they grew tall with large fan-like leaves and airy, spaced-out buds. The names described the 2 most common genera of the plant, not how they affect the user. Studies show that the diverse effects of cannabis come from the cannabinoids and terpenoids the plant produces as it grows. These chemical compounds serve the plant's needs, protecting it from predators, the elements, mold, and pests. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol is linked to the psychoactive high, but that effect is influenced by many other cannabinoids. For example, cannabidiol, a cannabinoid found in many cannabis varieties, can alter the cannabinoid type 1 receptor in the brain and change how delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol affects you. Cannabinol is another cannabinoid associated with sedative effects. Certain terpenes, a class of compounds found in many plants, can enhance or reduce the subjective effects depending on their amounts. Terpenes also have their own therapeutic effects and are prominent in aromatherapy and vaporizers. Lavender contains the terpene linalool, which produces a calming, relaxing effect and is also found in many cannabis varieties. Terpenes contribute to smell as much as effect, which is why people often choose cannabis based on aroma. They are seeking terpenes that worked well for them in the past. The effect of a specific cannabis variety depends largely on the ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes in that plant. For example, Kush is a family of indica strains originally from the Hindu Kush mountain range, which is why the Landrace strain was called Hindu Kush. Older Kush strains tended to produce high levels of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabinol, which can contribute to sleepiness. Kush strains also tested high in the terpene myrcene, found in hops and mangoes, which is associated with muscle relaxation, reduced sleeplessness, pain relief, and anti-inflammatory effects. Kush strains also tested high in caryophyllene, found in black pepper and cloves, which may help with arthritis and gastrointestinal inflammation. These properties are part of why indica became known as relaxing and sedative. Kush was a favored variety of illegal growers when cultivation first became common in the United States, and indica plants required less space, making them easier to cultivate discreetly. As growers began mixing genetics, the ratios and diversity of cannabinoids and terpenes changed. Modern Kush is often very different from older Kush because of crossbreeding. Consumers generally want a consistent experience and to know what they are buying. The industry simplified terms to give an illusion of consistency and to sell products with misleading claims. Even if a strain tests the same every time it is grown, there is no guarantee it will affect you the same way each time. Brain chemistry is constantly fluctuating and adapting to internal chemicals and external stimuli. It is impossible to predict and difficult to track on any given day. If someone more knowledgeable can fact-check this with sources, I welcome it. I have a lot to learn and limited trusted sources of information. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.